Hello, welcome to AB Lifetime, channel on transpersonal psychology. And our topic today is Kabbalistic Psychology. And we are here today with Dr. Les Lancaster. Hello, Dr. Lancaster.
And hello, Anna.
How
Hi.
are you?
Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for doing this interview.
Kabbalah is the mysticism associated with the Hebrew Bible. What is the role of the breath? You know, a great deal of the Kabbalah concerns the name of God. Now, in a simple sense, I've got a name, you've got a name. It's a way that we recognize each other. But in a deep sense, in the Kabbalah, the name of God is really an expression of the breath. So you're breathing in to the heart, right? So the heart, and as you bring that in-breath.
Would you please tell what is Kabbalah and what is Kabbalistic psychology?
Kabbalah, or it's pronounced in different ways. In modern Hebrew, Kabbalah.
Kabbalah.
Okay? But I think it's often anglicized into Kabbalah. So
Yeah, right.
the Kabbalah is the mysticism associated with the Hebrew Bible. So it's got many aspects to it, and in some senses there have been different incarnations, different phases historically. I think we would think of it especially as the mysticism within Judaism, the mystical core of that religion. But it's also had an impact in Christianity. There's Christian mysticism. If we're looking historically, there were many periods when other traditions connected. So, for example, in the 12th and 13th centuries, there was a lot of dialogue with Sufism.
Right.
So it's a mystical undercurrent, and some would see the Kabbalah as having roots in Egyptian culture in certain ways. And of course, Jewish history is very rich. The Jews have been in many different cultures, different countries, and of course, ideas are incorporated. You know, the cultures mix and ideas flourish. So it is very hard to tie it down tightly in that way. But I would say that the Kabbalah fundamentally, as I said, is the mysticism associated with the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. And as such, it penetrates deeply into the language of the Bible, and I mean the Hebrew. So it's a mysticism associated with language, and this will bring me towards answering the second part. What is Kabbalistic psychology?
Right.
Because language is central to who we are, what we are as human beings. You know, language is not just something we use to communicate. Language structures our reality. Language sets the bounds of ourself. Now, the Kabbalah, in a sense, deconstructs language. It goes deeply into the way in which we use language, the meanings of words. So in that sense, it becomes a psychology, because Kabbalistic practices are deeply enmeshed with understanding who we are and how the mind works. So now I can answer that question. What is Kabbalistic psychology? There's two sides to that. One is that there's a psychology implicit in the Kabbalistic tradition. Even if we're going back 600, 700 years, we find psychological ideas. So that's one aspect of Kabbalistic psychology. The second aspect is more contemporary, and that is to say, psychology has become a lens through which we can understand mysticism. So Kabbalistic psychology is also about the way we bring psychology into our understanding of the Kabbalah. I guess we need to bring examples to make this real. Yeah, what is Kabbalistic
that would be
psychology?
wonderful.
Yeah. So, for example, in the Kabbalah, we find ideas about expanded states of consciousness, as opposed to narrow states of consciousness. So that's, again, we're talking about works from hundreds of years back, but that's very modern for us. How do we transition from a narrow inward state of consciousness to a more expanded state? What is the role of the breath? A great deal of the Kabbalah concerns the name of God. Now, in a simple sense, I've got a name, you've got a name. It's a way that we recognize each other. But in a deep sense, in the Kabbalah, the name of God is really an expression of the breath.
Oh, really? Wow, I didn't know that.
Oh,
wow.
There are many things you may not know.
Yeah, I know.
There are many things I don't know.
Right.
And it's an ongoing process to plumb the depth of this very rich tradition. So yeah, I'll illustrate that. So, there's a name of God which has the sound hey, yeah, and it's simply the vowel. It's simply the movement of breath. And of course, when we breathe, we are connecting. We're connecting with what's inside us and what's outside of us, what's larger than us. And yeah, I think in a very profound way we could say that our connection with the divine, however we understand that, our connection with the divine is like the in-breath and the out-breath, the rising and falling of our being. So that's Kabbalistic psychology, because I'm drawing on something that is intrinsic. I could talk for hours simply about a name. So this is very extracted. But it's an example of something that is deeply expanded in the Kabbalistic literature, what we mean by a name of the divine. And I'm looking at it in relation to transpersonal psychology, how we work with breath, all the breath work, different forms of breath work. And it draws us into something larger. That's what this is really about, isn't it? It's a question of the scale on which we operate. If we want to, if we make ourselves small, we are small. If we find ways to expand the scale on which we operate, that's where we are. And of course that's our heritage. That's what it is to be a fully alive human being.
That's very deep. When you told about the name of God, it's like, wow. It's like wow, it's blowing my mind. It's very powerful. In Kabbalistic psychology, it's a lot of linguistic science involved, right? Because you are talking about the symbols of the letters.
There's no question in my mind. I've studied this quite deeply. And there is a mysticism intrinsic to the Hebrew language, and even more simplified in a sense, a mysticism of the letters themselves. It's a sacred language. If you want to think of that in a kind of historical sense, the letters that we have in Hebrew today, they originated at the time of the Babylonian exile, and we know that the language, in a sense, all the letters were reformulated at that time. And why was that so? Well, okay, these were people who are carrying an esoteric tradition. They had been based at the temple in Jerusalem, which was the core of that tradition. It was destroyed. And the way I would understand it is they realized that if you put the esoteric, the inner teaching into bricks and mortar, someone can come along and remove that. But what a great insight. If you place it into the language, who can destroy that? And Hebrew is one of the longest lasting languages, and I think this is at the core of it.
Would you tell that in Hebrew culture, as a culture, they play, for example, much more attention to the breath than other cultures, like, for example, some Western cultures?
We're talking about an esoteric tradition.
Yes.
And kind of by definition, not that many are engaged with an esoteric tradition, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, if we just talk about all the Hebrew speakers on the planet, I can't say how many would relate to that. I'm talking about those who understand the inner dimension.
Yeah.
And so the notion that the name of God is a kind of verb, and at the core of the verb are the vowels, and at the core of the vowels is the breath. I think that is a deep insight from the Kabbalistic tradition. But then let me illustrate the point about language and letters. Very simply, just start at the beginning of the alphabet. First letter, Aleph.
Aleph.
It's a silent letter. It has a sort of a dynamic above and below. So it's the silence behind creation, the stillness behind everything. Second three letters, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, they form a word. The word Beged, which means clothing. So that's the insight. There is a stillness at the core of everything, a kind of nothingness, a void. But that becomes clothed in the way we see the world, in the way we clothe our inner psychology. Behind the conscious is the unconscious. That we find this in all ways. It's psychological, it's spiritual, it's mystical. Or another aspect is the interpretive, hermeneutics, to give the fancy word. Okay, let's stay with clothing. In the Bible, there is a very important idea which involves clothing. Many will know the story of Joseph, okay? And, the great Hollywood, well, it wasn't Hollywood, but it started over in England. Joseph in his amazing Technicolor dream coat, okay? I'm sure everyone's heard of that. Okay, so in the Hebrew, kutanet pasim, which means, so his father gave him this coat. The symbolism of a coat, we just said, the coat covers all the core. We don't actually know what the Hebrew word pasim, it doesn't actually literally mean many colours. The Hebrew commentator, the most important biblical commentator, his name is Rashi, 11th century. So he makes a connection between this word, in the Hebrew is pasim, and it comes once in another work in the book of Esther. I don't want to spend too much talk here. The book starts with the king, his name was King Ahasuerus. He made a big festival, a big celebration. And the word that Rashi points us to is the word that is used for the elaborate and very rich hangings, like very expensive and rich cloth. And the point of the story is that this was an outward show. The king was showing off. Joseph, who had this coat, it wasn't his fault. Maybe his father gave it to him. Who was his father? Do we mean literally his father? Or is it something which is orchestrated at a higher level? So his coat was an expression of the ego, the fanciness, the display. And who was Joseph? He was the dreamer. He was the dreamer. He interpreted dreams. He ended up in prison. I can't tell the whole story. It's a fascinating story. But why did he end up in prison? Because ultimately his brothers were jealous of him because of his dreams. How did he come out of prison? Because he could interpret Pharaoh's dreams. It's all symbolic. It has a deeper dimension. The Kabbalah points us to these meanings, which are not simply meanings something that happened in history. They're our story. And we have to get into that and understand where, in what ways am I the dreamer? When do I wear a fancy coat? When am I in prison? What's my way out of prison? The Kabbalah is a route out of the prisons that we create for ourselves.
I loved it, all your short presentation. Could you please do some sort of demonstration so people understand practically what is it about?
Sure. One thing that I've been interested in is bringing the mysticism of the Hebrew letters into a system of movement. Yeah, because I'm a transpersonal psychologist.
Right.
I'm not a rabbi. Okay?
Right.
And I think what's central to transpersonal psychology is the recognition of embodiment.
Yeah.
That of course we're conscious beings, but the way in which we grow and we develop, all these mystical practices, for example, there are ways of engaging the body. It's important, And so it's fine for me to talk about the letters and all the mystical insights there, but to bring it into the body is very important. So we could do that as an example.
Wonderful.
Okay, so we have movements associated with all the letters. There's 22 letters.
Yeah.
This is the first letter, right? So this is the letter
Aleph.
Aleph, exactly, yeah. And so you can see there's a kind of dynamic. There's something coming above, and there's something coming below. And this letter is all about the relationship above and below. And so we have a movement that relates to that, but it's not only an outward movement. And again, you know, we can't do this in a short time.
Yes.
But I want to just seed the idea that it's associated with the breath, okay? So there is a breath cycle where we're breathing, as it were, from above, yeah? I mean, obviously we breathe through nose and mouth, and but you've got to imagine, you've got to get into a kind of suspending disbelief. So you're breathing in to the heart, right? So the heart, and as you bring that in breath, right? That in breath, it's like a sound that you're breathing in. So it's okay, so then the out breath, so that's just one in breath, right? Breathe in to the heart, and then the out breath, you're going to breathe down to the earth. And if you want a movement with this, we just very simply, you know, when you're breathing in, you're cupping the hand under the heart. So your focus, you're kind of centered in your body, breathing in from above, and then we're turning the hand down, so now we're breathing down. So our out breath is going down into the earth. That's right. And then it reflects back, so the hand is still here because it's coming up from below, the breath, the same sound. And now it's going to push out above, so the hand comes below. We're pushing now up. So, okay, I was talking through that, okay? We're just going to do very briefly, and obviously people can do this more, and you have to do this for a while. You can't just do it in a second, as it were.
Right.
But what I'm going to do is do the breath. I'm not going to say anything. Just want to remind you that you've got to be centered in your body, you know, feet on the ground, head above, and heart is the center. Okay, so there's a sort of expansion of the heart involved in this. And then you're taking your attention above. The breath is coming in on the in-breath. It's going out on the out-breath. It's coming back up with the next in-breath. And it's going out above. And that's an ongoing cycle.
Okay.
But we'll just do that a little, just a couple of times. And what we do is when we're a couple of cycles, and then we come to this point, which is going back above, if you remember, from down there, and we kind of bring this arm up and bring the leg out. Okay?
Oh.
So now,
when it's out. Okay.
Yeah. So this is a movement.
It's kind of reminding that letter. Okay.
It's not just literally the shape of the letter, but it has a connection with it.
Yes.
But it's a way of expressing in movement this balance. It's a balance. It's a connection above and below, which is being seeded through that breath cycle. So we have time to do that?
Just two breaths.
2 breaths. Ready?
Yes. And I will follow.
In your own time.
Okay.
So you can hold this for a long time. Your arm might get a little tired, but it moves into the next letter, but we're not going there today.
Wow.
And there are
Thank you.
22 letters, so it's more
Yeah.
complex.
Wow.
And it's a way of engaging with the pattern of creation. So in that sense, it's Kabbalistic. Okay.
Wow. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Bockler, Dr. Lancaster, thank you so much for doing this interview. Could you please tell briefly about what you are doing and about your cooperation in the project Alef Trust?
Okay, let's start with the cooperation. My background is somewhat intellectual, although I work with movement as well, but I was a professor at university in UK, so I'm deeply interested in transpersonal psychology, but we need in it to have an integrated, a whole program. It needs that other side, that artistic side, that practitioner side, and that's where Jessica comes in.
Yes, so Les and I founded the Alef Trust together, and the Alef Trust is a not-for-profit organisation, and its main output is in education, although we also deliver community programs. But just to speak a little bit about the education programs we deliver, there are in the university, so they're postgraduate, as we call them in the UK, graduate in the US, programs in consciousness, spirituality, transpersonal psychology, and we deliver a master's program that brings together these themes or these topics and enables students to create their own learning trajectory so that they can build the learning into their professional lives. So we have students who are therapists, counsellors, social workers, but also people who work in journalism, in corporate, police, that's right, nursing, many different professions. And people are interested in taking the transpersonal perspectives and integrating them into their lives. Now, in terms of our complementariness, in terms of our complementary backgrounds, I come very much from an experiential arts-based background. My training was in theatre arts originally. I've worked a lot in participatory arts. And what we do in the program is that we combine intellectual study with experiential learning.
Yeah, and my background was originally neuroscience, moving more into cognitive science, and then the psychology of spirituality and mysticism. And the other thing I would say, just to complete the picture, is that we really operate online. Although there are times that we come together physically. Yeah. All our operations, all our learning is happening online. But at the centre, really, what was the core of our founding of the Alef Trust is the need for community. The sense that there are many people, I think, who are sensing this spiritual upsurge in our day, but they may be somewhat isolated. And I think that's the real need in our day, to that sense of belonging, that sense of togetherness, and that it's one thing to be sensing a spiritual core, maybe having experiences of a spiritual nature, but it's another to understand that there's a whole scholarly basis for this as well. So that's what we try to bring together. I think that's at the core values of our community.
Thank you so much. So all contact information of Dr. Lancaster and Dr. Bockler you can find below the video in the description box. And thank you for watching. Thank you for participating in this little project.
Thank
Namaste.
you. Thank you, Anne. Be careful. Be careful.